Take a look at this conversation about Israel. Take a look at the answers in depth and let's discuss it. Take a look.
Imagine that the Nova Party had taken place in New York. Imagine that at 6:30 in the morning, rockets started to land over your head. Imagine within about 20 minutes, big bearded men with machine guns and Kalashnikovs and grenades came and raped your friends in front of you and then killed them in front of you and then came for you next. And in your last moments, that was what you saw. One of the, without getting too gruesome, but let me just perhaps do so for once to hit home the point. One of the people who I interviewed who had been in the Nova Party had said at one point that there was a young girl on her knees. One of the Hamas terrorists had killed her best friend in front of her. And they were debating whether or not they should take her into Gaza or kill her. And she was screaming, "Please don't kill me, please don't kill me." And they shot her through the face, and she was still shouting that when her face fell off. That's what these guys are. Does any student in America understand this, or can have any understanding that these people would do that to them? My just prayer is that they don't, that they're simply lacking in imagination.
I mean, just taking a look at this, how can anybody in the world side with Hamas? Anybody? Take a look further.
But if this happened to them, and if this happened to them and they, like the Nova survivors, came to New York for an exhibition about the Nova Party, and then they find in the streets of New York, outside the exhibit, American students and others chanting support for the people who did this to their friends, I don't know how some of these, they're so brave, these young people, to still be going around the world telling their story. When they go around much of the world and they meet people they tell their story to, who are supporting the people who did it. This is a level of human evil I don't think that, human lack of empathy perhaps I can say, that is beyond my comprehension. I just want to say one other thing on that. We have seen something like this before. We saw it in the 60s and 70s when part of the left in Europe decided to take up the cause of the PLO. You know, very interestingly, one of the things about the Entebbe raid that people don't realize is that two of the hijackers were members of the German left. One of them used to live with former Foreign Minister Schröder. And they had decided after World War II there was one thing they wouldn't be, which was they wouldn't be Nazis. And this is quite a good idea. It's a good orienting principle, you know. Don't be Nazis. But I just want to stress that even that isn't enough on its own, not with other moral cause to you, not with other things in your system. Because by the 60s, the PLO and all of those groups, some of the German left fell into that. And one of the things about the Entebbe hijacking, which is not well enough known, is that when the plane was landed in Uganda, the main hijacker, the German leftist, sorted out the passengers, Jews and non-Jews. Mm-hmm. Jews and non-Jews. Now, it wasn't just Israelis and non-Israelis. They got the American Jews into the line with the other Jews. And there was a man on the plane at Entebbe, one of several people on the plane who was a Holocaust survivor. And as he heard this German left-winger shouting orders to the Jews after the selection process, he showed his tattoo from the camp and said, "I had thought that people had changed." And the hijacker has been quoted by several people present as having said to that man, "I'm not a Nazi, I'm an idealist." We've seen these people before. but we've seen them off before.
I wondered before we go to questions, you've met so many people in your time in Israel. You've talked to survivors, you've gone to jails where terrorists are being held. You've, of course, met with so many political leaders. You shared an image I don't think any of us will ever forget about what happened to the woman on her knees at the Nova Festival, and I think each one of us in this room has different images that we go back to. I wondered if you could give us a different kind of image, because one of the things you talked about when you recently won the Alexander Hamilton Award is you've said that your friends have commented to you that you've changed since October 7th. And the way that you've changed is that you're actually less pessimistic. So give us some reasons that you've left some of that pessimism behind, maybe through some people that you've met.
Well, the real thing, is that one of the first times I was in Israel, I had a very a rather personal feeling. I heard she said this before, but there was rocketing in the north, and I hadn't been under any serious bombardment before. I'd seen stuff in Iraq and elsewhere. And I remember coming back from a day in the north where there's been rocketing, as there was again recently in the town of Svat. And I thought something very strange when I got home, which was I thought I could look my grandparents in the face. And what I mean by that is, for my generation in Britain, it was always the question, would we be able to do what our grandparents had done? Living through the Blitz in London, night after night, and not losing their faith and not losing their strength. And I used to hear stories of that, terrible stories, when I was growing up, of what that was like. And from those who went and fought, the ones who didn't come back. And in my country of birth, Great Britain, like in America, every country is filled with family stories. My grandmother on my father's side lost her father in the First War and then her brothers in the Second. And always fighting the Germans. And every family was like that. And it was always this question of, if the time of trial came, would we be up to it? And that was what, just in my small little way that day, I remember thinking. I got a little taste of what my forebears went through. Tiniest one. But everyone in the West, somewhere in our back of our heads, has this thing. And Israelis had it, always. Until, there was always a thing, since 1973 in particular, and the first Lebanon War, second Lebanon War. Always this question of, are the young people going to be up to it? And I have so much admiration and pride and so much more that this generation of young Israelis were put to the test, and they've been magnificent. And if you see what these young men and women do on a daily basis, from the south of Gaza to the mountains of Lebanon and Syria in the north, and they don't do any of it with hatred in their hearts. They don't. Some of what they have to do, some of what they've had to do is just beyond description. But they do it from love of their country, love of their people, love of their tradition, defense of their people, defense of their tradition. They know that they are fighting for the Jewish people as their forebears have before, but this time with a state, with an army, with an air force. And they've stepped up to this moment, and they have been extraordinary. People will write books about this generation. And I just say, the best thing about it is that it should tell us that there is also a better way. There is a better way than this nihilism and hatred which has been bred in America. There is something else other than this culture of resentment and failure, and it is failure. There is something better than this culture of grievance and I don't have enough, or someone else must have something. Or as Ronald Reagan said once, this idea that if there's a fat man standing by the side of a thin man, it must mean the fat man took something from the thin man. There is something else than this thing that has ended up in the last year being a celebration of a death cult. There is such a thing as gratitude instead of resentment, pride instead of envy, and pride in the real sense, pride in something you should be proud of, pride in protecting your people and your faith and your community, and indeed, in my view, the civilized world. So I've just met, I can't even begin listing the number of people, but anyone who feels down from spending too much time with people in America should come to Israel, and you will see that, among other things, the people who thought that the next generation of Israelis just wanted to party were wrong. And it turned out not to be an either-or thing. You can fight for your country and your people, and you can still dance. And that's what they're showing.
What's being spoken about here is Mesirut Nefesh, self-sacrifice. It literally means sacrificing your life for your ideals, for Torah, for commitment. And this is what the young generation of Israelis have had to endure and are still enduring, because the war is nowhere near over. Fortunately, we have had to rise like lions and protect ourselves, and we will continue to do that until the time of Mashiach, when Messiah comes and will redeem us and will end all evil, will end all wars. But until that time, we have to be strong and do whatever's needed.